Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and good morning. My name is Muhammad Ferdhous and today I would like to explain about my research paper which the title is The Determinants of Malaysian Commercial Banks Dividend Policy. So I will briefly explain about the what is a dividend. So a dividend is the distribution of some of company's earning to a class of its shareholder as determined by the company board of directors. Or other term is dividends are payment made by publicly listed company as a reward to investors for putting their money into the ventures or the company. So in this intro, I've explained about why every aspect of dividend is very important for the investor or other parties to be concerned about, whereas it will reflect their returns either in a short term or a long term. So when it call about all aspects of dividend, this is the critical part where I will explain about the determinants of dividend policy that can affect the dividend payout ratio in a firm. So, determinants of dividend policy is defined as items or factors that can lead directly toward the decision making. So, for the dividend policy, it is about what factor or cause that can lead to the changes of dividend policy toward the shareholder. So 25 commercial bank in Malaysia has been used by me to test about determinants that can affect the bank's dividend policy. Okay, so next to the problem statement of this research paper. So obviously the first one is many of previous researchers are agreeing about these things, whereas the determinants of dividend policy can affect the dividend payout decision of some firm. Many question has been confused, such as what are the determinants that can highly influence the dividend policy and why this term is very important for the investors and other parties in order to know about the returns in the firm. So, in the context of Malaysia, even though there were some studies that surveyed and examined factors which contribute in affecting the dividend policy, the reported findings were mixed and the data used by the findings are not recent. So this is become a question mark for many of researchers since there are no final decision made to present the determinants of dividend policy that can affect the firm's dividend payout ratio. So there are two objective of this study, whereas the first one is to study what are the determinants of dividend policy within commercial banks in Malaysia, and the second one is to study which of the determinants can affect the dividend policy payout toward the firm shareholder. The significance of this research paper is obviously is very valuable for any company and even for investment decision for shareholder because the decision can help them to detect what factor that will affect the dividend payout of a bank every year. This is because all of these final results will determine about the changes in their dividend payout return for a short-term and long-term period. It can be the best critical strategy for the investor and other parties to be implemented since it can show how much dividend policy changes every certain year. For the limitation of study, the first one is it was a hard time for me to have consultation face to face with the lecturer since the online distance learning has been implemented. And the second one is some of the data used in this paper were manually extracted. So the risk of miscalculating the variables are very high since the values are determined manually with the corresponding financial formulas. So, and the last one is this paper had conducted several findings, whereas all of data were extracted from only year 2015 to 2019. This is because there are some banks who are not still covered up their current 2020 financial statement data or still not announced their financial report for year 2020, which has met a restriction toward finding the current data in the annual report. So this is the conceptual framework for this research paper, whereas the dependent variable is the dividend of company, and the independent variable is the earnings, debt, and size of the company. And these three independent variables will be measured on how these variables highly affected the firm's dividend or not. For the literature review, this is the previous dividend policies theories, and all of them are very different. Where, as you can see, there are seven theories about the dividend policy, which include the M&M theory, residual dividend theory, clientele effect theory, birds in the hand theory. This theory is the most often used by researchers. And the next one is pecking order theory, information content theory, and the last one, agency cost theory. Next to the data and methodology, for the data sources, the banks chosen in the study were listed in the Bank Negara Malaysia (BNN) that comprised of 25 commercial banks, whereas 8 of them are local banks and 17 of them are foreign banks. And the next one is the data of the banks were extracted from every bank's annual report in the official website. And the last one is the data used are currently present and officially from the bank's annual report. And for the data variables, as you can see, this is the variables where the proxy variables for the dividend is the firm's dividend per share, and for the earnings, the firm's earning per share. For the debt, the firm's total liability over the total assets, and the size is the natural log algorithm for the total assets of the firm. For the hypothesis development, it will determine either the dependent variable, which is the dividend, and the independent variables, such as earnings, debt, and size. Either these both variables are significantly connected or not. So the HO will represent the null hypothesis, whereas the H1 represents the alternative hypothesis. So the following table shows the result of a descriptive statistical test and a test of normality for the earnings, debt, and size of the firm of the Malaysian commercial banks with a total observation of 125. So this is the result of BPLM test and the result of heteroscedasticity test, whereas the p-value of both of these tests is same, where it comprises of 0.0000, which estimated as 0.0001. This is the result of correlation and the result of multicollinearity, whereas also, both of these p-value of this test is greater than 0.05. Thus, we should accept the null hypothesis as there are no correlation and multicollinearity presence in this test. This is the regression test for this paper. As you can see, the p-value for this test is 0.2817, which is more than 0.05. It indicates that it is not statistically significantly predict the dividend, and it obviously indicates that the regression model is not really useful for this data. So this is the final result from the previous test, and as you can see from the result in the table above, all of the three independence variables are show insignificantly relationship towards the dependent variable, which is the dividend, since the p-value of the three independent variable is more than 0.05. Therefore, all of the three independent variables are accepted null hypothesis. To conclude, the objective of the study have been achieved, whereas the first objective is to examine what is the determinants of dividend policy in the commercial bank in Malaysia. And the second one is to determine which determinants have highly affect the dividend policy in the commercial bank. The result of this has shown where the three of the independent variable, which include the earning, debt, and size, do not have significantly relationship with the dependent variable, which is dividend. So this is the recommendation which I have made for the future researcher, and that's all from me. Thank you very much. Thank you.